I grew up believing that family was a lifelong bond. My parents always said we had to stick together, no matter what. When I was little, it comforted me. I felt safe knowing they'd protect me if things got rough. But as I got older, I realized their concept of sticking together was more about draining every resource I had. They believed I owed them for raising me. It started small. They asked for help with groceries or gasoline. Then it escalated. Within a few years of landing my first stable job, I found myself sending them regular, mandatory money. They framed it as my duty, reminding me how they'd sacrificed for me during childhood. That guilt weighed heavily, so I complied. Each month, I wired an amount that steadily grew. I paid for their bills, their minor home repairs, and even some extravagant hobbies. They never said thank you. Instead, they treated it like a tax I was obligated to pay. I lived in a tiny apartment, barely affording my own needs, while they dined at fancy restaurants or went on weekend trips. Any protest I voiced was met with accusations of ingratitude and threats of cutting me off. I endured that dynamic for 12 long years. My friends asked why I allowed it. To them, it seemed absurd that an adult would systematically bankroll their parents without question, but they didn't understand the emotional blackmail embedded in every conversation. My parents hammered home that I'd be nothing if not for their sacrifice. They reminded me of how they struggled when I was a child. It felt impossible to argue. Whenever I considered stopping, I'd imagine them in dire straits and feel guilty again, so I continued. Yet, deep down, I longed for a way out of that cycle. Eventually, I got promoted, earning a better salary. I decided to funnel that into savings rather than increase their stipend. That was my first real act of defiance. They noticed, of course. My mother called, furious that I hadn't upped their monthly amount. I calmly said I needed to invest in my future. She called me selfish, spat out an entire lecture on filial duty, and slammed the phone down. That night, I realized I was trapped in a toxic obligation. Still, I continued paying them the same sum because the thought of fully cutting them off felt too daunting. Over the next few years, I saved diligently. My career advanced, and I was able to put away a decent amount. When the real estate market presented a good deal, I jumped on it. I bought my first house, a 3-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. I'd never felt so proud. My parents, however, viewed my purchase as an affront. The day I told them, they demanded I send an even larger sum, claiming that if I could afford a house, I could certainly increase their money. I refused. That conversation ended in a screaming match and abrupt disconnections from them. They went silent for a while, which I found both unnerving and liberating. I finally felt free to enjoy my new home without the constant drip of demands. I focused on renovations, turned one room into a home office, and settled into the neighborhood. My life felt surprisingly calm. Then, out of nowhere, my mother called with devastating news. My father was diagnosed with a serious illness. She claimed they needed a huge amount for his treatment, insisting that I sell the house to cover expenses. The dread in my gut told me I was about to face another war. I didn't doubt the diagnosis. My father's health had been declining for a while, though he always waved off concerns. But my mother's solution felt extreme and manipulative. I asked why they couldn't use their insurance or tap their savings. She claimed there was no insurance and they had no savings left. Then she reminded me of my duty to family. I refused to sell my house. I offered a more modest sum, stating that was all I could spare. She exploded, screaming about my callousness and threatening to disown me if I didn't put my parents first, as always. I hung up, shaking from anger and frustration. They expected me to gamble my entire security for a treatment they hadn't even researched. If I sold my house, I'd be right back to living paycheck to paycheck, or worse. I felt trapped again, but this time, I knew I couldn't cave. Over the next week, they bombarded my phone with messages and calls. Some were manipulative pleas, others were outright abuse. My father managed to leave a weak-voiced voicemail about how disappointed he was in me. My mother wrote paragraphs of guilt-laden text. I blocked them both for my sanity. For a while, it was quiet. I went about my life, focusing on my job and settling into the new house. Then I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find both parents standing on my porch. My father looked unwell, but not on the brink of death. My mother had that glare she always wore when she wanted something. They demanded to come in, so I let them. The moment they sat, the barrage began. Tears, accusations, appeals to family loyalty. I refused again. They ranted about how I was ungrateful and how I'd betrayed them. I calmly explained that I'd done my part for 12 years. I'd paid them every month, sacrificed my own comfort, and now I had to protect my future. They refused to accept that. My father dramatically clutched his chest, proclaiming he might not survive if I didn't pay for his treatment. My mother shrieked that I was sentencing him to die. I reminded them I'd already offered a smaller amount and that they should look into loans or government assistance. That enraged them further. They stormed out, threatening to return every day until I changed my mind. I felt sick. They kept their promise. Each morning, I'd wake up to them hammering on my door, demanding entry. Sometimes I stayed quiet. Other times, I told them to leave. They refused. They sat on my steps for hours, hurling insults. My neighbors became concerned. One even asked if I needed help. I tried calling local authorities for advice, but they said as long as my parents weren't harming anyone or breaking property, there wasn't much they could do. It escalated when my mother started screaming about how I was a terrible daughter, enough for half the neighborhood to hear. I snapped. I swung the door open, marched outside, and told them they had 5 seconds to leave or I'd call the police. My father tried to guilt me again, repeating that he was dying. I told him I'd help find a hospital willing to offer payment plans, but I wasn't going to ruin my life for their planning. My mother called me a monster. I held up my phone and started dialing. She panicked, tried to reason, but I was done. They left, shouting that I'd regret my cruelty. I locked the door, collapsed on the couch, and burst into tears. I took off work the next day, half expecting them to show up again, but they didn't. I used that time to think about my situation. I'd never cut them off because I feared losing the only family I had, but in truth, they were nothing more than financial parasites. 12 years of enforced payments, 0 genuine affection. Even the stories they told me about their hardships felt suspect now. I decided enough was enough. I drafted a letter to them stating I was permanently ceasing all financial support, that I refused to sell my house, and that this was final. I sent it via certified mail, ensuring there'd be proof they received it. After that, I blocked them everywhere. Days passed in uneasy silence. A part of me worried they'd escalate again. Another part felt a strange calm, as if I'd finally reclaimed my life. Then I got a call from a relative I barely knew. She said my mother was telling everyone I had abandoned them in their hour of need. That relative asked if I really intended to let my father die. I was furious. Clearly, my parents were broadcasting lies to shame me into compliance. I declined. I told her a condensed version of the truth. I'd been supporting them for over a decade, they felt entitled to my savings, and now they demanded I sell my home. She was stunned. She admitted she'd only heard my mother's sob story. We ended the call on a polite note, but I felt my blood boiling. My parents were turning extended family into their flying monkeys, yet no one offered to help pay for Dad's treatment. They just pressured me. This was classic emotional manipulation, designed to guilt trip me. I resolved to remain firm and not give in again. A week later, my parents showed up at my front door once more. This time, they brought suitcases, claiming they had nowhere else to go because they'd spent all their funds trying to pay for partial treatments and living expenses. My father moaned in pain, acting like he could collapse any second. I asked if they'd pursued any official assistance. My mother dodged the question. She demanded I let them move in until Dad recovered. I refused again. Their jaws dropped. Then came the yelling, name-calling, cursing. I warned them to leave, but they refused. So I dialed the police. Officers arrived, and I explained the situation. My parents tried to spin it as a family disagreement, but the cops were firm. I said I didn't want them on my property, and they had to leave. They begged the officers to force me to let them stay, but that request was obviously denied. My mother started crying, telling the officers I was abandoning them. The officers told her there was nothing they could do unless a crime had been committed. Eventually, my parents collected their suitcases and left under police escort. I felt a giant weight lift from my shoulders. That incident changed something in me. I realized that they wielded their parenthood as a weapon, but I wasn't a child anymore. They had no power over me except what I allowed, so I decided to dismantle their campaign. First, I posted my own version of events on social media, explaining my 12 years of financial support, their demands, and how they insisted I sell my home. I didn't name-call or rant. I stuck to facts. The relatives who'd been told I was abandoning them suddenly had a much clearer picture. Some apologized, others remained staunchly on my parents' side. Then I contacted a few agencies to see what healthcare options might exist for them. I figured I'd share the information. If Dad was genuinely sick, then resources existed beyond draining my life. I compiled a list of community programs, charities, and state provisions for low-income medical support. I emailed it to my parents with a short note. I suggest you explore these. I will no longer fund your lifestyle. Of course, they never responded. It was never about genuine help. It was about controlling me. But I felt better knowing I'd done more than enough to properly guide them. My mother kept spreading stories. One claimed I'd stolen their retirement funds. Another that I'd tricked them into signing away their assets. Ridiculous fabrications, but they found some believers. I blocked each liar on social media. A few cousins reached out to check the truth. They were shocked by my evidence of financial transfers and monthly statements. In the end, most people realized how twisted this situation was. My parents had been milking me for years, and now they wanted even more. It felt good to have the record set straight, though I knew my parents would never stop lying. About a month after that, I heard through the grapevine that my father had applied for government assistance. Apparently, it didn't cover everything, but it was a start. I felt relief that he might actually receive treatment. I also heard my parents were living with an elderly aunt. I felt bad for her, but there was nothing I could do. I refused to finance them anymore, no matter what story they concocted. That realization spurred my final act of revenge. I collected all my receipts, bank statements, and call logs proving their history of exploitation and filed them away safely. I wanted to be ready if they tried to sue me or spread worse rumors. Over the years, they'd threatened lawsuits for elder neglect or theft. If they ever attempted such nonsense, I'd be prepared. I also informed my workplace about the situation, just in case my parents tried something drastic there. My boss was sympathetic, and security was alerted to deny them entry if they showed up. That felt like the ultimate measure of how toxic they were. I had to warn my employer about my own parents, yet I wasn't going to let them destroy my livelihood too. Time passed. My father received enough care to stabilize him, though he'd never fully be healthy again. My mother kept spinning tales, but with my evidence out there, fewer people believed her. I stopped feeling anxious when the doorbell rang, stopped dreading phone calls from unknown numbers. Gradually, I found peace. I still had moments of anger remembering their audacity, but mostly, I felt relief. My finances improved, and I started living a life that wasn't overshadowed by their demands. The sense of freedom was incredible. I no longer felt obligated to bail them out of every crisis they manufactured. I also got engaged. My partner knew everything about my family, and we agreed on strict boundaries. My parents, of course, tried to contact my partner behind my back, but he blocked them. We planned our wedding without them. Some relatives called, asking if I'd exclude my parents. I said they were welcome to stay out of my life. If that meant missing my wedding, so be it. I refused to consider their feelings when they'd never cared about mine. My partner supported me wholeheartedly. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was overshadowed by relief at my decision. On my wedding day, we had an amazing ceremony with close friends and supportive relatives. My parents were nowhere to be seen. I didn't waste a single thought on them until afterward, when I noticed a ranting message from my mother on my voicemail. She claimed I'd humiliated them, that everyone was judging me for not inviting my own parents. I deleted it. My wedding was perfect for me, and I wasn't going to let her ruin that memory. My father sent a text, demanding I reimburse them for the pain I'd caused. I blocked that number immediately as well. I never answered their calls or messages again. I changed my number, relying on a secure email for communication if necessary. But they never reached out in a constructive way. They wanted to continue their old game, and I refused to play. Over time, I felt a satisfying sense of vindication. I'd stood up for myself, shown them I wasn't a doormat anymore, and refused to be blackmailed. Sure, they still slandered me, but my life was healthier without them. People who mattered to me understood the truth. I offered no forgiveness. Their betrayal sealed their fate in my world. I looked back at the years of monthly payments, remembering how I struggled while they lived comfortably. They'd guilted me into paying for their luxuries, not just necessities. I recalled how they only showed love when money was involved. Seeing it clearly made me furious. My decision to cut them off completely was the best revenge I could wield. They'd lost their financial puppet, their scapegoat for every problem, and they no longer had leverage. Ironically, their attempts to coerce me only strengthened my resolve. I'd do it all again, just to make sure they couldn't keep stealing from me. When people ask if I regret not forgiving them, I say absolutely not. Forgiveness implies I'd allow them back into my life, which I refuse to do. They took advantage of me for years and felt no remorse. They tried to ruin my reputation, demanded my house, and showed up at my door daily until the police intervened. That's not behavior worthy of forgiveness. It's behavior that warrants permanent boundaries. My revenge is living well without them. I've drawn a line they cannot cross, and that line is enforced by my refusal to engage no matter how hard they push. Their betrayal taught me the value of self-preservation. I once believed I owed them everything because they gave me life. But they squandered any natural bond through their relentless greed. Sometimes, I wonder if things could have been different if they'd shown genuine care or worked with me rather than against me. Then I vividly remember their fury the moment I asserted myself. I don't think they ever wanted a real relationship. They wanted a permanent piggy bank. I don't forgive them. I protect myself. That's my final stance. And it feels damn good not to be their victim anymore. So that's my story, all 3,000 words of it. 12 years of financial servitude culminating in their demand that I sell my house to fund my father's treatment. When I refused, they showed up incessantly, and I finally called the police. I don't regret my choices. Cutting them off was necessary, and any hope for reconciliation died the moment they tried to ruin my life. My revenge was setting firm boundaries and exposing the truth of their exploitation. I walk forward unburdened, free of their demands and manipulations, and I won't ever forgive them for the pain they caused. I'm not the type to broadcast my problems on the internet, but I've spent years reading posts that got me through some rough patches, so maybe it's time I return the favor. This is a story about me, my daughter, and my ex, who walked out on us when my little girl was barely a year old. I've never forgiven her for that. Now she's back, sporting a neck tattoo and spewing lies, trying to steal my daughter from me. She nearly succeeded. I want to tell you how it happened and how I fought back. I'm not sure if you'll find it entertaining or cautionary, but I promise it's 100% real, and it's definitely not something I ever expected to share publicly. My daughter, Allie, was an unplanned blessing from a relationship. Her mother, let's call her Miranda, was charming but unpredictable. We were both barely out of college when Allie came into our lives. Miranda had a streak of recklessness I tried to tame, but it never worked. One day, she decided motherhood just wasn't her thing, so she left. She never said goodbye. I spent those weeks stumbling through diapers and midnight feedings alone. My parents offered help, but I wanted to prove I could be a competent father. The years passed quickly. I got a decent job in IT, found a solid daycare, and eventually moved into a small but cozy 2-bedroom apartment. Allie grew into a brilliant kid. She loved drawing and had an odd fascination with insects. She'd run around the park collecting ladybugs, then run back to me with a grin. I tucked her in every night, read her stories about stress or sacrifice. If I ever missed having a partner, I coped, focusing on being best dad I could be. Miranda never paid child support or bothered to see Allie. Time mostly helped me compartmentalize the betrayal, bearing it under daily routines. Some women appreciated that Allie was my priority, others found it too complicated. Things were stable for years until the day I got a message on Facebook from a woman claiming to be Miranda. I nearly deleted it, but then I saw pictures, photos of the two of us from college, images of Allie as a baby, all posted on a profile that said Miranda Johnson. She asked if we could meet. She claimed she was ready to be a mother. My first reaction was fury. Did she really expect to waltz back into Allie's life after disappearing for over a decade? But Allie was already 12, old enough to ask questions. Despite my better judgment, I agreed to a meeting in a public place. I wanted to gauge her intentions and see if there was any shred of remorse. Miranda showed up in an outfit, heavy makeup, and that neck tattoo that crawled up toward her ear in swirling letters I couldn't decipher. She looked exhausted, yet oddly triumphant. Right away, she started with apologies, crying about how she was lost and scared back then. She claimed she'd changed. Her sob story might have tugged at my heartstrings years before, but not now. I was polite but distant. I told her if she wanted to see Allie, we needed to set boundaries and move very slowly. She nodded, seemingly eager. Allie was hesitant when I explained her mother wanted to reconnect. I tried to be neutral, though a part of me wanted to spit venom. Still, I believed Allie deserved the truth, so I let them meet. I hoped it wouldn't backfire, but I was wrong. Completely. I introduced them at a local diner. Allie was nervous, and Miranda put on a show of affection. She hugged Allie like she was the most precious child on earth, nearly suffocating her. I sat across the booth, arms folded, trying not to roll my eyes. The conversation was awkward, mostly driven by Miranda, who rattled off details of her new life, a stable job at a boutique, a nice apartment, and some vague spiritual awakening. She painted a picture of redemption. Allie listened politely, nodding at times, sipping her milkshake. I had my doubts, but Allie seemed open-minded, though not entirely convinced. After that day, Miranda kept texting me, asking to see Allie again. Against my intuition, I arranged a few more visits. They went for walks, grabbed ice cream, and even visited an arcade. Allie told me Miranda was cool, showing her silly tattoos and telling wild stories about traveling the country with friends. I tried not to pry too much, but inside, I worried about what influence Miranda might have. I wanted to trust Allie's judgment. Eventually, Miranda proposed that Allie spend an overnight at her place. I wasn't thrilled, but Allie begged me to let her go. She said she wanted to give her mother a chance. So I agreed on one condition. I'd pick her up early the next morning. Miranda accepted. That night, I barely slept. Memories of being abandoned plagued me, and I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. But I also didn't want to be the controlling dad who never lets his kid explore relationships on her own terms. When I drove over the next morning, Allie seemed fine, a bit tired, but smiling. Miranda waved goodbye with a grin. I forced a polite nod, still suspicious, but hopeful maybe I was wrong. Over the next several months, I noticed small changes in Allie's behavior. She started dressing more like Miranda, wearing clothes that didn't really suit her. She also got into heated arguments with me over little things. I tried to be patient, attributing it to teenage mood swings. Still, I couldn't ignore Miranda's growing presence. She picked Allie up from school sometimes, even without telling me. Once, I found out Allie skipped her after-school math club to hang out at Miranda's apartment. When I confronted Allie, she claimed I was overreacting. She insisted Miranda was just trying to make up for lost time. I wanted to believe that was true, but a part of me saw red flags everywhere. Miranda never offered any financial help for Allie's needs. She also refused to discuss legal custody arrangements, brushing it off as paperwork drama. Meanwhile, Allie started becoming more secretive. She'd text under her blanket late at night, whispering and giggling. If I asked questions, she got defensive. Then one afternoon, Allie came home with a brand new tablet. I hadn't bought it, so I asked where it came from. She smiled sheepishly and said Miranda gave it to her as a gift. I smelled manipulation. Miranda had never contributed a penny to child support, yet she was suddenly showering Allie with pricey gadgets. I told Allie we should talk about expensive gifts before accepting them. She exploded, accusing me of trying to control her and hating her mother. That night, I found Allie crying in her room. She said Miranda told her I was always too strict, that I never let her have fun. Miranda had apparently shown her old photos of me partying in college, painting me as a hypocrite. I felt my stomach churn. The wedge was forming, and Miranda was hammering it in deeper. I tried to stay calm, reassuring Allie that I just wanted what was best for her, but she was already drifting. Our arguments got worse. I could feel Miranda's influence pulling Allie away, and I was terrified. Part of me wanted to ban Miranda entirely, but I knew that would only feed her narrative that I was an authoritarian father. So I tried to compromise, hoping Allie would see who was truly in her corner. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. I nearly lost my mind when I saw the legal documents. Miranda's filing was filled with accusations that I was emotionally neglectful, controlling, and financially irresponsible. It was beyond insulting. I devoted my entire adult life to caring for Allie. Meanwhile, Miranda was gone for over a decade, and now she was making me out to be some kind of unstable monster. I was furious, but I also knew I had to keep my composure for Allie's sake. I hired a lawyer. He advised me to document everything, all communications, all instances of Miranda's interference, and all my records of caring for Allie. My parents offered to write statements about how I'd raised her single-handedly. Even some neighbors and teachers were willing to testify on my behalf. Still, I was shaken. Allie was torn in the middle, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. On one hand, she had the father who'd been there her entire life. On the other, she had the mother she'd longed to know. Miranda tried to charm the court by playing the role of a reformed parent. She wore conservative clothes, toned down her makeup, and covered her neck tattoo with a scarf. She delivered a sob story about her personal struggles and how she'd found enlightenment. The judge ordered a temporary visitation schedule that allowed Miranda weekends with Allie. I had no choice but to comply. At first, Allie seemed happy, enjoying the new attention, but I noticed her grades started slipping and she became more withdrawn at home. She'd light up whenever Miranda texted, but roll her eyes when I asked about her day. I felt powerless. I couldn't forbid her from seeing Miranda. That would just confirm Miranda's accusations that I was a controlling parent. So I played along, heart-pounding, waiting for the next blow. As the custody battle dragged on, Miranda's true colors started showing. She'd show up late for pickups, sometimes not arriving at all. Allie would be left waiting, fighting tears. Miranda always had a slick excuse, blaming traffic or sudden work emergencies. When she did appear, her car reeked of smoke, and Allie complained about the messy apartment. Still, Allie defended her mother, insisting she was trying her best. One weekend, Miranda took Allie on a road trip without informing me. I only found out when Allie texted to say they were 3 hours away in some sketchy motel. I was livid. I called Miranda, demanded to know what was going on. She blew me off, claiming she had a right to bond with her daughter. My lawyer later told me this was a direct violation of the court's temporary order. I documented it all, even saving the motel receipt Allie showed me. Miranda was building a case against herself, and she didn't even realize it. Meanwhile, Allie was torn. She wanted to have fun with her mother, but she also recognized the chaos. I tried to be understanding, but the tension in our home was constant. We argued more, and she threatened to go live with Miranda permanently. That statement cut deep, though I kept my voice steady, reminding her that I'd always be there. I was at my wit's end, exhausted and upset. Then I discovered something that changed everything. Miranda had coaxed Allie into signing some questionable legal form stating Allie preferred to live with her mother. Allie was only 13, but Miranda had manipulated her into believing it would guarantee more freedom. She had Allie scan it and email it to her lawyer. I found out when I checked the printer's history. My heart sank. This was war. Instead of confronting Allie in a rage, I took a calculated approach. I copied every piece of evidence. The text messages about the unauthorized road trip, screenshots of Miranda's last-minute cancellations, the suspicious legal form Allie had signed. My lawyer recommended we push for a formal home evaluation. He believed that once a court-appointed evaluator saw Miranda's living conditions, it would hurt her case severely. Allie was still moody, still half brainwashed by Miranda's promises of a carefree life. I kept telling myself she was just a kid, desperate for maternal love, and not to take her hostility too personally. But it hurt. I recalled the nights I spent feeding her, rocking her to sleep, sacrificing everything for her. Now she was poised to leave because Miranda showed up with flashy gifts and empty words. A court date was set for a final custody hearing. In the weeks leading up to it, Miranda escalated. She posted on social media about how I was a deadbeat father who never let her see her own child. She used old photos of Allie crying, insinuating I'd made her miserable. Of course, the comments section was filled with friends of Miranda echoing her twisted narrative. I stayed silent online, mindful that anything I posted could be used against me. When the big day arrived, Miranda strode into the courtroom wearing a modest dress, the neck tattoo hidden again by a scarf. She put on a tearful performance, painting me as an angry control freak. My lawyer systematically presented the evidence: receipts, text messages, witness statements. The judge's demeanor shifted. We saw the mask slip from Miranda's face. She tried to defend herself, claiming the road trip was a misunderstanding and that her messy apartment was temporary. But the judge wasn't buying it. I could see the tide turning. The judge delivered a ruling that Miranda and I would share legal custody, but physical custody would remain primarily with me. Miranda was granted supervised visitation until she could demonstrate responsibility. I felt immense relief, though Allie was visibly upset. She glared at me, tears in her eyes, blaming me for humiliating her mother. My lawyer said it was a good outcome, but I still felt the sting of my daughter's disappointment. The next day, Miranda blew up my phone with furious texts, accusing me of turning Allie against her. She threatened to run off with Allie if I didn't back down. I warned her that any such stunt would land her in serious legal trouble. She didn't listen. Over the next few months, she kept pushing boundaries, trying to pick Allie up outside her scheduled visitation times. She even showed up at Allie's school once without permission. Security had to escort her out. Allie was mortified. I tried to be gentle with Allie, reminding her that I wasn't trying to keep her from her mother, but rather protect her. She was cold to me for a while, but eventually, the cracks in Miranda's facade became too big to ignore. Miranda's cancellations became more frequent, and her excuses became flimsier. One day, Allie waited by the window for hours, expecting Miranda to come take her shopping. She never arrived. Allie ended up sobbing in her room. I sat beside her, quietly, letting her vent. Days later, I noticed Allie rummaging through old photos, the ones of just the two of us. She looked at me with watery eyes and apologized. She said she'd been so blinded by the idea of having a cool mom that she overlooked Miranda's broken promises. That night, she told me she wanted to live with me full-time again. I expected Miranda to apologize or at least show some humility after letting Allie down so many times. Instead, she doubled down on her narrative that I was manipulating Allie. She blasted social media again, posting vague rants about being kept from her child. Meanwhile, she got another tattoo on her neck, a larger, more aggressive design that crawled across her collarbone. Allie didn't even mention it until I saw a picture online. Then came the final straw. Miranda showed up at my door late one evening, clearly intoxicated, demanding to see Allie. She screamed insults at me, claiming I'd ruined her life and stolen her daughter's love. I refused to let her in, telling her to come back during her scheduled visitation, sober. Allie watched from behind me, horrified. Miranda cursed both of us, kicked my trash can, and stumbled away shouting she'd get even. That was it. I was done trying to reason with her. I called my lawyer the next morning, told him everything, and asked how we could ensure Allie's safety for good. He advised filing for a protective order. I gathered video footage from my doorbell camera of Miranda's drunken outburst, plus testimonies from neighbors who witnessed her erratic behavior. We submitted everything to the court. The judge granted a temporary restraining order prohibiting Miranda from contacting Allie outside supervised visits. If she violated it, she could be arrested. Allie felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. She finally saw Miranda's true colors, but the loss of the mother she'd envisioned was painful. I reminded her that this wasn't her fault, that she'd given Miranda every chance to be better. Allie nodded, wiping tears, realizing how toxic Miranda's influence had been. My priority was protecting my child. I wish the story ended there, but I promised revenge, and I keep my word. Miranda tried to dodge the restraining order by harassing Allie on social media under fake accounts. My lawyer advised me to collect all screenshots. Then I discovered something crucial. Miranda had lied on several legal documents about her income, claiming she was nearly penniless to avoid child support. However, her public posts bragged about expensive purchases, a new motorcycle, elaborate vacations, designer handbags. She was basically handing me the weapon I needed. I compiled every incriminating post, every contradictory statement, and handed it all to my lawyer. We filed for back child support and contempt of court charges. Miranda was clueless, still trying to appear destitute in court while flaunting her lifestyle online. The judge was livid when we presented the evidence. Miranda was ordered to pay thousands in unpaid support plus fines. She tried to weasel out of it, sobbing that I was ruining her financially, but the court didn't care. She'd walked out on her responsibilities, and now she was suffering the consequences. She refused to pay, so we pressed further. Her driver's license was suspended, and the state threatened to garnish her wages. When she ignored that, a warrant was issued. She was arrested for contempt, spending a night in jail. Allie heard about it and simply shrugged, telling me Miranda had brought it on herself. There was no forgiveness in my heart, no pity. She deserved it all. Today, Allie and I are closer than ever. She's 14 now, focused on her studies, and no longer chasing after a fantasy. Miranda remains a volatile figure, occasionally popping up online to rant, but her hold on Allie is broken. I got my revenge not through violence, but through the same legal system she tried to use against me, and I have no regrets. I never thought I'd share this story, but I need to get it off my chest now. I discovered that my entire family knew about my fiancé's affair with my best friend, yet said nothing. The wedding was days away, and they were determined to keep me completely in the dark. I grew up as a people pleaser, always doing whatever I could to maintain fragile family harmony. I never imagined my parents and siblings would withhold something this devastating, especially before my rehearsal dinner. Brad, my fiancé, was the man I believed I'd grow old with, loyal to a fault. He came across as gentle, patient, and supportive, so it really felt impossible that he'd ever cheat. Kara, my best friend, was practically a sister to me, someone I always trusted with everything. I still can't wrap my head around how she justified sleeping with the man I loved. Unreal. I first heard whispers of their affair from an old acquaintance who showed up in town. He claimed he saw Brad and Kara acting too familiar at a bar, thinking they were unnoticed. Initially, I dismissed it, convinced Brad and Kara would never ever betray me like that. But that night, doubt clung to me, and I started scrutinizing interaction between my fiancée and her. They exchanged glances that seemed loaded, but I talked myself out of confronting them, terrified of conflict. I confided in my sister, hoping she'd tell me I was imagining things, but she froze. Her silence was my first real clue that something bigger was quietly happening behind my back. I confronted my dad, thinking he'd reassure me, but he dodged the subject and insisted I relax. That was so unlike him. He usually pried into every aspect of my life, no exceptions. I felt sick. I decided to investigate, so I checked Brad's phone when he left it charging in the kitchen. He'd always been protective of his privacy, but I had a nagging feeling something sinister was there. Sure enough, I found messages from Kara, though they were mostly very mundane at first glance. I scrolled deeper and discovered coded language, references to meeting up, and a hidden folder of photos. That was my confirmation. Explicit pictures of them together, time-stamped nights I thought he was working. I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to stay calm and took screenshots, sending them to my phone. I hid my rage because I needed a plan, especially knowing my family had hidden this. I suspected they thought I'd never find out, that I'd go through with the wedding ignorant. Cruelty of it stunned me, but I was ready to exact my revenge at the rehearsal dinner. Perfect. In the days leading up to the rehearsal dinner, I pretended absolutely everything was normal. Brad still texted Kara on the sly, thinking I was clueless, while my family kept acting oblivious. I had to play the doe-eyed fiancé, busy with floral arrangements and seating charts, while seething inside. Every time my mom asked if I was stressed, I forced a smile, wanting to scream the truth. This charade felt suffocating, but it was necessary if I wanted to execute the perfect takedown. I started collecting evidence, including screenshots, phone logs, and even times they snuck off together. My intention was to confront them, ensuring no one could spin the narrative in their favor. The worst part was acting normal around Kara, who kept texting me about dresses and bachelorette plans. I'd respond politely, knowing full well she'd probably just been rolling around in my fiancé's bed. It was torture. I confided in no one. My siblings had already proven their loyalty lay elsewhere, and my father was no help either. He kept insisting I relax, like this was all some minor glitch. My older brother, who usually meddles in my life, pretended to be too busy with work. The conspiracy felt suffocating. I decided not to risk confronting any of them privately. I wanted the maximum impact when I finally revealed everything. Meanwhile, Brad kept telling me how excited he was for our wedding. Every time he kissed me or called me babe, I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I barely slept. I kept replaying how I'd expose them all. I planned to humiliate Brad first, then Kara. Finally, I'd confront my family for their betrayal. Forgiveness was never an option. They would all pay. The rehearsal dinner was held at a nice banquet hall. Everyone dressed up, smiling as though we were on the verge of a joyous celebration. My mother fussed over decorations, my father greeted guests, and my siblings flitted around, pretending nothing was amiss. Brad was all charm, shaking hands and making small talk. Kara arrived fashionably late, wearing a dress that was way too white for someone who wasn't the bride. Seeing them together made my blood boil. My mother pulled me aside at one point, whispering that I looked pale and needed to eat something. She didn't realize my adrenaline was off the charts. I just nodded and excused myself. I watched as Brad and Kara exchanged a smug smile in a corner, thinking nobody saw. Little did they know the entire evening was my stage, and they were about to be the unwitting actors in my show. Just before dinner was served, I signaled the banquet staff to help me set up a projector. Everyone looked curious. Usually, slideshows at rehearsal dinners are sweet collages of the couple's history, but I had other plans. Brad approached, asking if I needed help. I told him to sit tight, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. Once everyone was seated, I stood up and thanked them for coming. I saw my sister's face go pale, realizing I might be about to drop a bomb. I clicked to the first slide, a photo of Brad and me beaming with happiness. A collective awe filled the room. Then I progressed to random pictures of us through the years. Everyone relaxed, thinking it was a typical presentation. That's when I unveiled the screenshots, text exchanges, and incriminating images of Brad and Kara. The entire room went dead silent. Brad leapt up, stammering, "It's not what it looks like!" Kara gasped, her face contorting in horror. My family exchanged panicked glances, fully aware they'd been complicit. I kept my voice steady as I explained how I'd learned of their affair and how each member of my family had known but said nothing. My mother tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I let the screenshots scroll, each one more damning than the last. Brad tried to yank the projector's cord out of the socket, but the staff swiftly intervened at my prior request. People around us stared, some in shock, some in morbid fascination. This was no typical rehearsal dinner speech. I turned to Kara and said, "You were my best friend. Thanks for proving loyalty means nothing to you." She burst into tears, but I felt not the slightest twinge of pity. I then asked Brad if he had anything to say for himself. He babbled about being drunk, stressed, and how it just happened. My father stood up, telling me to calm down, which made me snap. I told him to sit, that he'd lost the right to mediate anything. I demanded he explain why he kept this from me. He looked at my mother uneasily. She looked torn, and then came her bombshell. My mother spoke up, voice shaking. "I didn't want this wedding to go on because your father's been having an affair too." The room erupted in a collective gasp. My father's eyes bulged. She revealed that for years, my father had been involved with none other than Brad's mother. I nearly dropped the microphone. Brad's betrayal already stung, but learning my father and his mother had their own twisted history took this to another level. Chaos exploded. Brad stared at me, then at his mother, who was conveniently absent from the rehearsal dinner. My father tried to deny it, but my mother produced receipts, hotel bills, and cryptic emails. So while they were condemning me to a life with a cheater, my father had been living a double life. Everything started making sense. The hush-hush behavior, the reason my mother seemed so distant lately. I realized she'd discovered his affair and had chosen to let me marry Brad anyway, maybe out of spite or confusion. The entire room was ablaze with chatter. Brad sank into his chair, color drained from his face. My siblings looked mortified, but they didn't rush to my side. They just stood there. I felt an overwhelming surge of anger and triumph. None of them had my back, so I had no reason to hold back either. I took a long breath and spelled it out. The wedding was off. I declared it in front of everyone, making it official. Brad's face twisted in panic, and he tried to grab my hand, begging me to reconsider. I snatched it away, glowering at him. "You're a liar, a cheater, and you deserve nothing from me." Then I announced I'd be sending everyone a link to a folder of proof, just so no one could claim ignorance later. People stared as I walked around the head table to Kara. I told her I hoped she and Brad would be miserable together. She sobbed, but I had no sympathy. My mother kept her gaze on the floor. I turned to her, voice trembling with anger, and told her she should have told me the truth long ago. The betrayal cut deep, and I was done shielding anyone. Then I looked at my siblings. I demanded to know why they stood by and watched me plan a wedding with a man they knew was cheating. My older brother mumbled something about not wanting to break my heart. My sister said she was pressured by our parents to keep it quiet, hoping Brad would fix his mistakes. I felt a hollow laugh escape my lips. They'd let me buy a wedding dress, send out invitations, and book a venue, all while coddling the cheaters. The guests looked on, stunned, some visibly uncomfortable, others appalled. Nobody had seen a meltdown quite like this. I told my siblings I couldn't trust them anymore. If this was how they handled loyalty, I had no use for them. I saw tears in their eyes, but it did nothing to change my resolve. Their choices led to this. Suddenly, my mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She insisted she only stayed silent because she hoped I'd discover it on my own and break off the engagement without a public scandal. She admitted she'd wrestled with telling me, but feared my father's reaction, given his own affair. He had threatened divorce and financial ruin if she spoke up about his secrets. It was all too tangled. My father tried again to spin the story, but I cut him off. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. If they'd loved me, they would have protected me. Instead, they chose appearances over my well-being. I saw the guilt etched across my mother's face, but I was beyond caring. I turned to my father and told him he had no place in my life anymore. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. Determined to have the last word, I picked up the microphone once more. I told everyone present that there would be no wedding, no reconciliation, and no forgiveness. Brad tried to speak, but I raised my hand. This was my moment. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You two deserve each other. Congratulations on your happily never after." Then I pivoted and addressed my family directly. "You all knew. Every single one of you stood by while I planned the biggest day of my life. I hope you realize I owe you nothing now." A hush fell over the room. The weight of my words settled on them like a cold verdict. I handed the microphone to the speechless wedding planner, grabbed my purse, and calmly walked out. In that moment, I felt a twisted sense of liberation I'd never known before. I went straight to a hotel that night, ignoring the barrage of calls and texts. Brad left voicemails sobbing, claiming he was drunk or stressed, but his excuses meant nothing. Kara texted repeatedly, begging for my forgiveness. She insisted it was a mistake that spiraled out of control. I blocked them both. My father tried calling, but I rejected every attempt. My mother showed up at the hotel lobby, but I told the front desk to turn her away. My siblings sent long messages, claiming they never wanted to hurt me. I couldn't bring myself to respond. None of them deserved my attention. I drained a minibar bottle of champagne alone in that room, oddly grateful that I discovered the truth before signing those marriage papers. The bitterness was overwhelming, but so was the relief. I was finally free to move forward, unburdened by their lies. Of course, the fallout was massive. Vendors called non-stop, confused by the sudden cancellation. Extended family members reached out, demanding to know what happened. Gossip spread like wildfire in our social circles. My mother told me she was preparing to divorce my father, who had fled to his mistress's place for damage control. I heard through the grapevine that Kara lost her job after failing to show up for a week, presumably too embarrassed to face anyone. Brad was living with a friend, apparently in dire straits, since I canceled our apartment lease. Legally, I lost some money on the wedding deposits, but I considered it the cost of my freedom. People asked if I felt guilty for exposing them in such a dramatic fashion. Honestly, I felt no remorse. They had conspired to destroy me in private, so I saw no issue with my very public revenge. In the weeks that followed, I took time off work to sort my life out. I sought therapy to handle the betrayal and anger churning inside me. The therapist asked if I ever wanted to mend fences with my family. My answer was immediate. Not now, maybe never. They had known about Brad's affair and said nothing. They had watched me plan a wedding with a man who was sleeping with my best friend. That sort of treachery isn't something I can forgive. Maybe time changes things, but as of now, all I feel is righteous fury. My mother called daily, leaving tearful voicemails, but I let them pile up. My father tried to blame everything on my mother, and my siblings tried to remain neutral, but there was no neutral ground left. I told them all I needed space, and that was final. Eventually, word got around that Kara moved away. Good riddance. Brad tried to salvage his reputation, claiming I'd overreacted. He never mentioned the explicit photos, conveniently. I had a few acquaintances approach me, asking if I regretted humiliating him so openly. My answer was simple: absolutely not. He disrespected me behind my back for months. I had every right to reveal the truth. My bank account took a hit when I returned the wedding gifts, but I kept the ring for a while, debating whether to pawn it. In the end, I mailed it back to his address along with copies of the photos he'd so desperately hidden. Petty? Maybe, but I wanted to make sure he understood I was done playing nice. My best friend betrayed me, my fiancé cheated, and my family lied. I owed no one my kindness. I found a new job in a different city. It felt like the perfect chance to start over. On moving day, my mother showed up unexpectedly, tears in her eyes. She apologized for everything, admitting that she'd been weak and had let my father's manipulations dictate her silence. Part of me pitied her, but I couldn't bring myself to let her back into my heart just yet. I told her I appreciated her apology, but needed to go live my life on my terms. She begged for a chance to fix things, but I was numb. I asked her to leave before I broke down in front of her. Maybe someday I'll revisit the ashes of my relationships with my family, but not now. They all crossed a line that stole my sense of security. My trust in them is gone, replaced by a cold resolve. So here I am, in my new apartment, sharing this story with anyone who cares to read it. I'm not looking for sympathy, and I'm not searching for closure through reconciliation. I got my closure when I stood up in that banquet hall and exposed them all. My life is far from perfect now, but at least it's mine to rebuild. I'm taking it day by day, learning to trust myself again. If there's one lesson I learned, it's that betrayal deserves consequences, not forgiveness. Let them live with the aftermath of their choices. I'll live with mine. There's a certain peace in knowing I refuse to be anyone's fool. I don't know what the future holds for my family or if I'll ever speak to them again, but I do know I'm finally free, and that freedom is the sweetest revenge of all. I'm not the type to blast my personal drama, but everything has gotten so twisted that I need to set the record straight. My name is Haley, and I've been with Tristan for almost a year. He's thoughtful, sweet, and supportive. My best friend, Maddie, has been in my life since high school. I never expected introducing her to Tristan would end with her calling him dangerous and me questioning everything about her. Maddie was in town for work, so Tristan and I planned for them to finally meet. I'd been raving about Tristan to her and telling him funny stories about her. It felt like a big deal. My best friend meeting the guy I had serious long-term plans with. Everything started off fine at a cozy bistro near my apartment. After we ordered, I excused myself to the bathroom. I glanced back and saw Maddie and Tristan talking quietly. It looked innocent enough. I had no clue I was walking into a storm. Less than an hour later, my world flipped. The conversation flowed smoothly at first. We joked about old memories, teased each other about high school pranks, and Tristan shared a funny story about his childhood. After we ordered, I stepped away, leaving them on good terms, or so I assumed. When I got back, Maddie was glaring at Tristan like she wanted to lunge across the table. Her eyes were wild and her posture was stiff. Before I could ask, she spat out that I deserved better and that she wouldn't sit there and pretend he was a good guy. Tristan tried to speak, but she waved him off, accusing him of manipulation. I stood there, purse in hand, stunned. It was completely out of character for Maddie. When I tried to calm her, she just grabbed her coat and stormed out. Tristan apologized, baffled by her reaction. I felt mortified. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as I slid into my seat. Maddie's meltdown left me confused and worried. I'd never seen her explode like that. That night, I texted Maddie, pleading for an explanation. Her replies rattled me. She claimed Tristan was dangerous, that he'd threatened her, and that I had to trust her instincts. None of it sounded remotely like the Tristan I knew. Then she posted a cryptic social media message about protecting loved ones who are stuck in a bad situation. Suddenly, friends and acquaintances bombarded me with questions about whether Tristan was abusive. It felt surreal. I kept asking Maddie for details, but she refused to elaborate. She just insisted she was doing this for my own good. Meanwhile, Tristan was genuinely hurt. He reached out to Maddie, hoping to clarify the misunderstanding. Instead, she threatened him, telling him to stay away from me. I felt torn. Maddie was my best friend, but nothing she said aligned with who Tristan really was. Anxiety kept me awake all night. The next day, I demanded a full explanation from Tristan. He said that while I was in the bathroom, he asked Maddie about engagement rings. He wanted to propose soon and figured she'd know my taste. According to him, she immediately told him he had no right to rush me into marriage. He tried to explain that we'd already talked about our future, but she grew hostile. By the time I returned, things had boiled over. At first, I hoped this was a misunderstanding, but when I tried to talk to Maddie, she refused to listen, texting me a warning. "If you don't leave him, you'll see what happens." My stomach dropped. This was beyond concern for me. It felt like blackmail. I couldn't believe my best friend would sabotage my relationship over her own fears or jealousy. I felt a toxic swirl of anger and heartbreak. In the following days, Maddie messaged people in our circle, telling them Tristan had a history of harassing exes or that he'd assaulted me. All lies. My phone lit up with concerned messages and offers of help. Tristan, upset and confused, showed me how strangers were harassing him online, calling him a monster. I confronted Maddie again, begging her to stop. She insisted I was naive and that she was just protecting me. That's when I realized it wasn't a misunderstanding. She was willfully destroying Tristan's reputation to keep me from marrying him. I thought back to everything I'd done for her, letting her crash at my place when her fiancé cheated, connecting her with people in my field. It was a cruel betrayal, and my anger festered. I knew I had to stop her, not just for Tristan, but for my own sanity. I started with damage control, talking to every friend who reached out, showing them Tristan's screenshots of Maddie's hostile messages. Many believed me and realized Maddie's claims were baseless, but some found her story too compelling. Fine, I thought. Good riddance if they won't see reason. Next, I gathered evidence. I collected screenshots and voice clips from anyone she'd contacted. She was spinning tales of Tristan locking me in rooms, threatening my life, and more. Seeing her lies laid out was horrifying. Tristan was shaken, but he left it up to me to decide how to handle it. I decided I wouldn't let her get away with it. If she wanted to ruin our lives, I'd show her the consequences. No forgiveness, only the truth, weaponized. Maddie valued her career above all else, so I contacted her boss, attaching proof of her defamation campaign. I framed it as a concern for her stability, noting she'd used company resources. Then I messaged a high-profile contact in her field, calmly presenting the same evidence. I didn't exaggerate. I just let her words speak for themselves. Within a week, people told me Maddie's big project was put on pause, and she was called into a serious meeting at work. She called me in a rage, accusing me of destroying her life. She demanded I retract everything, but there was nothing to retract. She'd lied, and I'd simply exposed it. My guilt was minimal compared to the damage she'd done to Tristan. She threatened me again before slamming the phone down, but I felt no remorse. I was done being her victim. Tristan and I decided to refocus on our relationship. The chaos had tainted his proposal plans, so we put that on hold until we could breathe again. We spent our nights cooking together and binge-watching shows, trying to find some sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, Maddie's stories fell apart. Those who believed her found glaring inconsistencies. She tried claiming it was all a misunderstanding or that she'd been acting out of genuine concern, but the evidence spoke volumes. She even reached out through a mutual friend, suggesting we could talk if I apologized. It was laughable. I told them I wanted nothing to do with her. She'd burned that bridge. Our decade of friendship was reduced to ashes by her own hand. In the end, her job was spared, but she lost a major promotion and much of her professional support. Some might say I was ruthless, but I felt justified. She tried to paint Tristan as a monster, and I made sure she faced the truth. Now, Tristan and I are stronger. We haven't set a new date for an engagement, but we're happy. I cut Maddie out completely, and I don't forgive her. That's how betrayal works. You either let it break you, or you fight back. I chose revenge, and I have no regrets. Even after I cut her out, the repercussions of Maddie's actions still reverberated through my life. Some acquaintances were hesitant to reconnect with me, worried they'd be caught in the crossfire. At first, it stung. I'd scroll through social media, see photos of gatherings I wasn't invited to, and feel a pang of betrayal from people who claimed neutrality. But I tried to remind myself that anyone who sided with a liar without questioning her motives wasn't someone I needed in my corner. I poured my energy into the relationships that mattered, reaching out to old friends who'd shown me kindness when the drama first exploded. They'd ask if I was okay, and I'd hesitate, unsure how to summarize the emotional whiplash of losing my best friend and defending my boyfriend. Tristan was my rock. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, replaying Maddie's threats in my head. He'd hold me, reminding me that we had nothing to hide. We were the truthful ones in this mess. Sometimes he'd try to lighten the mood by joking that we should have eloped before Maddie had the chance to meddle. I'd laugh, but there was an ache behind my smile. I couldn't believe how far she'd gone over something as joyful as marriage. It wasn't just about the proposal. It felt like she needed me to remain perpetually single so I'd stay locked into our old routines. If I got married, I'd no longer be at her beck and call, and maybe that scared her. I remember the day I finally blocked her on all platforms. My phone vibrated with one last message, a long rant about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She wrote that I'd regret choosing a man over her, that we were supposed to be sisters forever, and that real best friends protect each other from harm. Reading that made my blood boil. If she truly believed Tristan was harmful, she should have come to me in private. Instead, she lied to half the city. Blocking her was the only way to preserve my peace. As time passed, I discovered more layers to Maddie's motivation. A mutual friend, who remained neutral throughout, confessed that Maddie had been dealing with jealousy issues for months. Apparently, Maddie mentioned feeling left behind whenever I talked about moving in with Tristan or about the possibility of kids one day. She was terrified we'd drift apart, that I'd no longer have time for her. It didn't help that her own romantic life was in shambles. After her cheating fiancé left, she bounced from one failed relationship to another, struggling to find stability. It was heartbreaking to learn she harbored such deep insecurities but chose to handle them with sabotage rather than communication. Part of me felt a twinge of pity, but the damage she inflicted was too severe for me to dwell in sympathy. One evening, I bumped into an old acquaintance who admitted she'd initially believed Maddie's story because Maddie spoke with such conviction and tears in her eyes. She genuinely seemed terrified for me. That acquaintance said Maddie's performance was so convincing it gave her goosebumps. Hearing that was a revelation. Maddie had manufactured a whole persona, weaving a tale of Tristan's so-called red flags and violent tendencies. She cried on cue, claiming she was powerless to stop me from walking into doom. The acquaintance eventually realized it was all an act when she saw how inconsistent Maddie's statements became. It was shocking to learn Maddie went to such lengths, but it solidified my resolve. This wasn't a friend concerned for my safety, it was someone acting out of desperation and resentment. Another friend confided that Maddie was still trying to do damage control by claiming Tristan's vibe was menacing, that she just felt something was off, but people saw through her vague warnings. The more she tried to stir suspicion, the more she lost credibility. It was both sad and satisfying to watch her unravel. Despite the chaos, I still had to live my daily life, go to work, pay bills, juggle responsibilities. But there were moments I'd be at my desk and a wave of anger would wash over me. I'd remember Maddie's chilling text. "If you don't leave him, you'll see what happens." She'd spoken like a villain from a cheap thriller, yet the consequences were painfully real. She'd made me question my own judgment, turned my social life into a battleground, and forced my boyfriend to defend himself against baseless accusations. I was determined never to let her or anyone else wield that kind of power over me again. Tristan suggested we see a counselor together, not because our relationship was fractured, but because we were both scarred by the betrayal. It was a wise decision. In those sessions, we talked about the trust issues Maddie's lies had planted. Even though I believed Tristan, I realized I was on edge, worried something else might blindside me. The counselor guided us to open up about our fears instead of bottling them up. We learned to validate each other's concerns. If Maddie had just been honest from the start, we might have resolved this without collateral damage. But she'd chosen war, leaving us to pick up the pieces. On my own, I read about toxic friendships, recognizing signs that Maddie had been subtly undermining my other relationships for years. It explained why she never liked me hanging out with certain friends, why she got irrationally angry if I couldn't drop everything to see her. She was territorial and controlling in ways I had dismissed. A layer of guilt peeled away. I realized I hadn't done anything wrong by moving on with my life. Her issues were her own. Accepting that truth was freeing. Each day without her interference felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I saw a future with Tristan untainted by her manipulations, and it made me all the more certain that cutting her out was the right decision. The backlash against Maddie in her professional sphere wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. A few months later, a colleague mentioned she'd been passed over for yet another promotion. The formal explanation was her lack of teamwork and questionable judgment. Apparently, word had gotten around that she was prone to orchestrating vendettas. Nobody wanted to collaborate with someone who might turn vicious at the slightest provocation. I won't pretend I didn't feel a spark of vindication. But I never gloated in public. By then, Tristan and I had moved in together. We focused on rebuilding the life she'd tried to tear apart. He asked if I was ready to talk about a ring again. I told him I wanted us both fully healed before taking that step. I didn't want our engagement overshadowed by her toxicity. In a show of solidarity, some friends suggested we throw a housewarming to celebrate the next chapter. We invited a handful of people we trusted. Over dinner, the conversation shifted briefly to Maddie, and I was surprised at how calm I felt discussing her. A friend mentioned seeing her recently. She'd looked anxious and avoided eye contact, rambling about being misunderstood. People had grown tired of her inconsistent claims. Listening to that, I felt relief rather than anger. I'd spent so long defending Tristan and myself. Now the truth was doing the work for me. We finished the night with laughter, good food, and a sense of closure. I realized I no longer needed to justify anything. Maddie's lies had suffocated me, but now I was finally breathing again. Months turned into nearly a year, and life finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. Tristan and I took a weekend trip to a cozy bed and breakfast, where we spent our days hiking and our nights making s'mores by a fire pit. We talked about the future without that ever-present knot of tension in my stomach. One quiet Sunday morning, as we lounged on the couch in our pajamas with cups of coffee, Tristan slipped a ring onto my finger. He apologized for the lack of grandeur, but I shook my head, tears in my eyes. It was perfect because it was ours, untouched by sabotage or drama. I said yes. When the news spread, well-wishers reached out. Some were folks who distanced themselves during Maddie's smear campaign, now offering belated congratulations. I appreciated the thought, but I kept my guard up. I'd learned the hard way that trust shouldn't be given freely once it's been trampled. Meanwhile, Maddie fired off one last email, a congratulatory note laced with sarcasm, hinting that Tristan would eventually reveal his true colors. She also offered a half-hearted apology, blaming stress and alcohol for her behavior. I stared at the email, feeling nothing but a dull emptiness. This was the person who'd once known my deepest secrets. Now, she was just a bitter footnote in my life. Without responding, I deleted her message and blocked her email. That was the final chord in our broken symphony. Sometimes people ask if I regret how far I took things. They wonder if I wish I'd tried harder to patch things up. My answer is always the same. Maddie attacked the person I love with calculated lies, nearly derailing my life. She forced my hand. I'm not ashamed of defending my happiness. Maddie taught me a painful lesson about betrayal, but she also revealed a part of me I hadn't known, the part that refused to back down. I learned that standing up for yourself and those you love is worth the fallout. It's worth the lost friendships, the headaches, the long nights of stress. Because in the end, the truth stood taller than her lies. And I've grown stronger because of it. I will never forgive her. I only regret not ending the friendship sooner. I am free, and that is enough.